Why is there no one, particularly at the federal level, knowing what we know now, knowing that they can't even lie about it anymore? Why isn't there anybody at the federal level running on a federal jobs guarantee or a modern monetary theory?
Well, take a look at John Yarmouth. He was speaking today, and he kind of laid out the stuff, but he's the only one because what they've done, and this is what always happens, is the powers that be. Remember, I think we talked about this previously about the Peterson Foundation. And the Peterson Foundation is a group of rich people that are fanning the flames about the fear of the national debt. Okay. Nancy Pelosi is part of that. And so are a bunch of Republicans. It's Democrats, Republicans. So there's no party difference there. They're all part of this thing, all of them. And the point of it is to push maximum propaganda down to keep people thinking that we have to live in a state of austerity. Claire Mattei, I think I've spoken about her before as well, wrote a fantastic book called The Capital Order. And it talked about how economists invented austerity. And by that act, invented fascism as well. And she took the case of Mussolini in Italy, and she took the case of Churchill in the UK, and they had two separate ways of saying the same things, but ultimately austerity won in both places. Austerity was still the narrative in both places. Why? It was a knee-jerk reaction to the Bolshevik Revolution, a worker peasant-led revolution in the USSR in 1917. Okay, that was right when the world had a major, oh my God. And the Capital Order, people start realizing, oh shit, we could do something different. We don't have to do it this way. We don't need these rich oligarchs. And they said, we're gonna fix that. And so they instituted all these austerity programs across the board. And FDR, for as flawed a man as he was, and he was very flawed, and I've got a lot of problems with FDR, and I've got a lot of problems with Keynes, but those folks showed that they were trying to balance the difference between capital and labor. They tried this balance thing, but in reality, all they did was delay the inevitable, because we've watched the entire New Deal crumble over the years as libertarians not being party libertarians, but people with that libertarian streak, that libertarian mindset. They are literally the ones that have been fighting tooth and nail with the Powell Memo and the Mount Pelerin Society to rip apart any public space. They want to make everything private. Once you privatize everything, now you can literally put a toll road in your front yard, and you can't get to A to B unless you pay a toll passing over my property. And this is the whole private property scam. And this is the right wing. And this is what we're dealing with right now, a huge ideological framework by which we're trying to make sure that no one has rights, that only people that are landowners and wealthy have any right whatsoever. And they have a right to their private property. And if you come on my property, I have a right to shoot you too. The castle doctrine, all these different laws. Okay. So I think it's really important just to understand the role of capital, the role of private property, and the role of resource allocation, and knowing full well that if some country has real resources and they're not willing to give it up, you're going to find a coup or you're going to find a war in short order, period, full stop.
Yeah, we're looking at that all over the place right now. I feel like everybody seems to be rising up in different places. And I do think it's eventually, what's going on in Africa, in Northern Africa, I think has been sort of sidelined here based on what's going on in Israel and Ukraine. But I'm not forgetting that. Like, that's a big thing that's going on there. And this sort of uprising against the colonizers is really, and in this country, to some extent, it's, in the labor movement, we're seeing that sort of mindset. And I somewhat find it inspired. And I know that it's going to be ugly, and I know that it's going to get worse, and it's definitely attached to violence, even though I'd rather it not be. But yet I feel inspired that we're seeing pockets of resistance in all different places.
Fingers crossed. It's the only way forward. I hate it. I'm not happy. I'm not in great health. I'm not a young man. I'm not, it will have grave impacts on my family, so from a personal standpoint, it's the worst possible thing. And yet at the same time, though, the deaths that come from policing in this country, the deaths that come from the wars around the world, the stuff that's happening with climate crisis, all the above come from this elite capture that we are stuck living as slaves in. If we're going to do anything about it, otherwise they're just going to build the spaceships off in the mountains like they did in the movies, and the rich are going to go and they're going to leave us here with the shit that they've left behind. And it's terrifying, quite frankly. Unfortunately, you asked the question, why aren't these politicians running on it? And it's because it sounds incredible. It sounds impossible. It sounds loony. And the minute you say it, somebody's going to say, but what about Weimar? What about Zimbabwe? What about? And instantly you see people in the chat doing this stuff right now.
Oh yeah, so because people because we are so battered down and brainwashed and propagandized that we cannot accept simple things like, really, people, this is basic. We're so used to being told this whole austerity
ironically,
mindset.
Though, I think we're pretty close on healthcare. I know that we've gotten to a point where you're starting to see even the libertarian attitude of what is the most efficient, cost-effective way to run a healthcare system. There is no question. It is single-payer universal healthcare, and it's not. There is not a debate. No. There is not an argument. There is nothing other than the government's going to run it. No, the government is going to fund it, and the doctors and the nurses and everybody else is going to run it.
But see, that's and to me, the bottom line is, but yet there would be healthcare.
Correct. And there would be healthcare not based on how much juice out of a lemon I can squeeze out of you.
Hey, somebody asked a really good question. If you don't mind, can I take a crack at it? Richard, can you put that up there? Just Richard's comment real quick.
People don't understand foreign denominated debt.
This?
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's a really, really important point. Okay. Sure. When Germany lost World War I and they imposed the infamous Treaty of Versailles. Okay. The debt that Germany had to pay was not in Reichsmarks. They couldn't pay in their own currency.
Right.
They had to pay in French francs. Well, how does Germany get French francs? Germany would have to do something to purchase something, to build something, to get French francs to be able to pay that debt. Otherwise, their sovereign currency could have paid that debt, but it was intentionally imposed. And you could look at that as an early precursor to the IMF, what the IMF did. The IMF does. The IMF always, instead of the IMF going to Africa and helping these African nations in their own currency, they literally impose debt in a foreign currency that they can't do, because the whole goal of the IMF is to impose structural adjustments and to literally free up markets and extract resources from the country. The only way to do that is to make it so that they can't use their sovereign money to get out of that debt. It must be foreign denominated. In other words, might put it in US dollar debt in US dollars. You can borrow $100 million of US currency. Well, $100 million to a government that creates its own currency isn't a big deal until it's imposed that it can only be paid in US dollars. It can't be paid in French or, Ghana or, pesos or yen or whatever. And so foreign denominated debt is different than sovereign debt, because I, as a country, I create my own money and I create treasury bonds out of my own money. And you can buy treasury bonds only with US dollars. So like one of the most important things is when countries do business with each other, China will do business with the US. They'll sell goods and services into the US and they get US dollars back. They don't get yuan back. They get US dollars back. And so what does China decide to do with its US dollars? It parks them at the Fed, it buys treasury bonds with it, and then it uses those bonds to facilitate transactions within the United States. Warren Mosler, who is the father of MMT, would tell you that it's really not important what we're transacting in. What matters is what countries want to save in. What are countries saving in? And so they talk about de-dollarization, stuff like that. Well, it's fine. You're not going to buy goods and services to the U.S. You're not going to do business with the U.S. is what that means. Or it means getting your loans and stuff through swap lines with China and the BRICS as opposed to taking out debt from the US through the IMF and then getting stuck with all these structural adjustments and all the other evils that are like placed on top of those debts. So it's important to understand foreign denominated debt is always debt that has to be paid in a different currency, a currency you don't create. So you have to do something very different, which is how they start the extraction process in these global South countries. I hope that helped.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.